Today, I'm talking with Jonathan Rinzler. Jonathan is executive editor here at Lucas Books.
Pablo Hidalgo, creative executive, knows probably more about Star Wars perhaps than anyone on the planet. You have so much more knowledge of Star Wars than I do.
One of the things we've discovered as just tearing into Star Wars history and uncovering its past is how much it's evolved over the years, and yet, at the same time, how many pieces have continued.
I was going back and looking at the treatment, and there's a part where these guys throw General Jedi Luke Skywalker off a cliff, but he hangs on to a vine. Does that recall anything to you?
Yeah.
Indiana Jones, right?
Indiana Jones, yeah.
And, but then, yeah, with the rough draft, I remember reading it and going, this is so different from the final film. I mean, we both talked the interesting ways that it started with George kind of doing this blue sky version where Han Solo is a giant green alien, R2-D2 talks, and I don't know, when you read it the first time, what struck you?
What struck me is how similar, or how many elements in the original draft of Star Wars ended up feeling a lot like Episode I. And that you went more into the center of affairs. You visited the imperial capital. You visited a palatial estate. You visited this sort of like sophisticated civilization as opposed to going out and only staying in the wilderness of things. Like it still had that. It had like a small farm setting, and it had like a forest full of primitive aliens. But you could tell that George had no thought of constraining his imagination as far as budget or execution, because there was no way any of that early stuff was going to make it to screen.
George was very much influenced by what was happening in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, it got into it was a lot more political than what we remember in Episode 4, 5, and 6.
Right.
And for those who thought it came out of nowhere in Episodes 1, 2, and 3 that it got political, for those of us that had been looking into the roots of Star Wars, we kind of knew that it was always going to be that.
The idea of the Force goes back to THX. Talk about not throwing out an idea. THX 1138. There's a scene that was cut where they talk about how there's a force that sort of underlies everything. And then in the rough draft, it resurfaces as the force of others. They say, may the force of others be with you. What's amazing to me, too, is that even while they were shooting, one of the most important script changes happened, which was the death of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Right. In the shooting script, he lives, he survives this fight with Darth Vader and lives till the end. And while they were shooting in Tunisia, George decided that somebody had to die during their big run through the Death Star, otherwise the Death Star wasn't menacing enough. And the fact that Obi-Wan then surrenders and lets himself be killed and then comes back, essentially teaching Luke that death is an illusion, is such a huge, important concept for the whole...
I know, it's a central spiritual thrust, and it only came about because the realization that someone needed to die.
Right.
After production had already started.
We started doing this back on Episode 3. We'd meet at Foodles.
Yeah, it's a little diner across from ILM, and we right before we go to dailies, we'd have an hour of breakfast and just talk about, well, what did you hear? What did you hear?
Right, exactly.
Every time we've uncovered some sort of interesting piece of Star Wars history, we'd share it, talk about it.
And we have lunch.
Yeah, we keep talking about this, and we keep discovering things, and it's like, I consider myself very lucky to have a job where Star Wars is my primary concern. I mean, how many people can say that? And then also just being able to, as a legitimate extension of what I do for a living, to research Star Wars and then to talk about it. With someone who also researches Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a cliche, but they always say it's the people you work with, so it's been great, getting to know you, and at the same time, you're getting to know Ben Bird, and I'm getting to know Roger Crit, and it's amazing how it's become sort of this intergenerational group that kind of learns from the previous generation, and then hopefully we're kind of mentoring the people who are now joining the company.
Yeah, hopefully people will start trying to get stories out of us.
Right. Yeah. Well, wait a second.